It was discovered at the time that Terry Bollea, also known as Hulk Hogan, was suffering from a serious medical issue. Medical staff provided him with immediate attention and transported Mr. Bollea to Morton Plant Hospital, where he passed away at 11:17 a.m. We all thought we understood what happened, but what the FBI found inside his Clearwater mansion after his death is something no one saw coming, and those who know exactly what it is are not talking. Police officers and paramedics present that morning have privately contacted his own daughter, risking their careers, because what happened in that house was never meant to be revealed. And nothing about how this legend died was as simple as the headlines suggested. The morning of July 24th. On the morning of July 24th, 2025, Hulk Hogan was found unresponsive at his Clearwater home. 3 weeks earlier, he had appeared on Fox and Friends to promote Real American Freestyle, the wrestling league he had been creating with his longtime friend Eric Bischoff. He came out with a cane and looked noticeably thinner than he had in years. At the end of the segment, without anyone asking, he looked into the camera and said, "I need to take a nap, brother. I'm totally exhausted." Everyone in the room laughed. No one took him seriously. Looking back on that moment now, knowing that in 3 weeks he would be dead and federal agents would be searching his house, that casual remark about needing a nap seems less like a joke and more like the words of a man who already knew something was wrong and had no idea how bad it was going to get. The day before he died, he posted a picture on Instagram of a beach towel with his own face printed on it. A can of his Real American beer resting on the handprint on the towel, and a caption that read, "Beach Day sponsored by the fraternity." Even Kevin Nash, one of his oldest friends in the business, said they had been texting 2 days prior and that Hogan seemed full of energy, while his son Nick Hogan said his father had been counting down the days until his wife Sky returned from her wellness retreat. No one reading that post had reason to see it as a farewell. The following morning was the last thing he said to the world. Sky made the 911 call at 9:51 a.m. 3 words. He stopped breathing. It wasn't a collapse, not a heart attack, just a man who had simply and quietly stopped breathing. And by the time she found him, there was nothing that could be done. Paramedics worked at the scene and transported him to Morton Plant Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 11:17 a.m. The cause was listed as acute myocardial infarction, certified by his primary care physician with no autopsy performed. By the time the public processed the news, the body had already been cremated, and with it, the physical evidence. The house was still there, and what investigators found when they crossed the front door didn't match a natural death in almost any significant detail. But before we get to what they found, you have to understand something that happened 2 months earlier, because without it, nothing else in this story makes sense. The surgery no one talked about. On May 14, 2025, Hulk Hogan underwent a 4-level anterior cervical discectomy and fusion, a procedure in which surgeons access the neck, remove damaged discs at 4 vertebral levels, and fuse the bones together to relieve pressure on the spinal nerves. It's one of the most complex operations in spinal surgery, and at 71 years old, with more than 25 previous surgeries, everyone in his inner circle understood the risk. What they didn't understand, at least not publicly, was what Hogan himself began to suspect weeks after returning home. The medical professionals who reviewed the case after her death focused on a specific concern that never made headlines: the phrenic nerve. The structure that moves the diaphragm and controls the body's ability to breathe passes directly through the surgical field in a multi-level anterior cervical surgery. Damage doesn't always show up on the operating table. It can appear weeks later, silently, as respiratory failure without a dramatic presentation or warning signs that someone close would recognize as an emergency. The result isn't a heart attack as people imagine. The result is a person who simply stops breathing. That's exactly what Sky described when she found her, and here's the detail that changes everything. In the weeks between that surgery and her death, Hogan began making calls she had never made before to people in a world far removed from professional wrestling. And what those calls reveal about what she suspected is the reason the FBI was inside that house in the first place. Who was she calling? And why change all the statements? Natural deaths? But before that, what exactly do you think investigators found when they walked through the front door? This truth is more shocking than you might think. A house that had been set up as Hulk Hogan's gym was the place where he felt most like himself, and even through surgeries, recoveries, and periods when he could barely move without pain, he kept returning to it. His son, Nick, described him in his final months as more focused and disciplined in his training than at any other time in his life, which is exactly what made what investigators found so difficult to explain. A room that had been used 2 days prior shouldn't have looked like this. Polished surfaces, weights arranged in geometric rows with the uniform spacing of deliberate placement rather than actual use. Unmarked mats, no water bottles, no towels. Someone had been in that gym before the 911 call was made, and whatever they were doing wasn't working out. One of the officers who entered described it as eerily sterile, almost staged, and that word changed how they viewed everything else. Then came the security system. Hogan's Clearwater property was equipped with a redundant, layered surveillance network covering every entry point and interior common area, with backup systems designed to withstand even power outages. But this entire network had reportedly been disabled from inside the house before the 911 call was made. There were no signs of forced entry anywhere on the property, meaning whoever disabled it was already inside and trusted. Local authorities analyzed both of these details and made a decision that speaks volumes about how seriously they treated the scene. They called in the FBI, which arrived with cybercrime specialists, computer forensics units, and smart home analysts, whose mission was to reconstruct every movement inside the property in the hours leading up to the 911 call. They confirmed the shutdown was done from the inside. They couldn't confirm who did it. But when they reviewed Hogan's phone records and communications, they found something in the 3 days before his death that made the sterile gym and the disabled cameras seem like the least alarming part of the whole picture. The call 3 nights before he died. 3 days before his death, Hulk Hogan received a late-night phone call, and Sky Daily's account of how he responded is one of the most specific and disturbing details of the entire case. Never, in all the time they were together, had she seen him react the way he did to that call. She watched him listen silently for almost a full minute, saying virtually nothing, and end the call pale and visibly shaking, with an expression she described as pure, animalistic fear, the kind that can't be faked or controlled. This was a man who had survived the public collapse of a 24-year marriage, financial ruin, and a depression that he later admitted had brought him to the brink of giving up. He had recovered from all of that without ever appearing frightened. After this call, when she pressed him, he evaded her with the practiced precision of someone who had long ago learned to keep certain things under lock and key. Investigators traced the call and hit a wall. The number wasn't listed in the phone book. The call was made to the previous number, and the operation required technical sophistication and a deliberate, premeditated effort. It wasn't a misdialed number or someone making a casual contact. Someone took careful, layered steps to ensure the origin of that conversation couldn't be traced. And they did so with such precision that not even the FBI's cybercrime division could get to the bottom of the trail. The content of the call is classified as part of the federal investigation. What investigators did determine is that the call was made with deliberate technical sophistication, consistent, according to sources close to the investigation, with someone who had a motive to know what Hogan had been secretly building for months, and a motive to want him to know that they knew. Something that, until the second forensic analysis of that mansion, no one outside his inner circle knew existed. But before we get to the bedroom, you need to understand one more piece that connects all of this. because the will he signed 2 years before his death and what he did to his own daughter is what ultimately explains why the body camera footage from that morning remains sealed today. The tapes to which no one can access. Brooke Hogan was estranged from her father during the last 2 years of his life, and the final amendment to his will made that estrangement legally official without any ambiguity. Under no circumstances will Brooke Bollea or any of Brooke Bollea's descendants be considered a beneficiary, and any reference in the will to his children will not include her. His son Nick was named the sole beneficiary of an estate valued at approximately $5 million. Brooke said she requested to be removed from the will herself, calling Hogan's financial administrator in 2023 and requesting it because she feared the fights that would follow his death and didn't want to be a part of it. Under Florida law, all decisions regarding the body, the autopsy, and access to investigative materials rested entirely with Sky Daily as the surviving spouse, meaning Brooke had no legal grounds to demand anything. The will wasn't drafted in a single sitting. Hogan first signed it in 2016 and amended it 5 times before finalizing the version that excluded Brooke. Each revision was a quiet adjustment of who he trusted and what he wanted to endure after his death. What makes the timeline harder to ignore is this. According to estate reports, Hogan made significant changes to his financial arrangements weeks before he died, including creating new offshore trusts and transferring assets that his lawyers have refused to publicly explain. A man restructuring his estate weeks before he dies isn't automatically suspicious, but combined with everything else happening inside that house in those final weeks, it stops being a coincidence and starts to look like a pattern. And the patterns are exactly what federal investigators are trained to read. What Brooke didn't anticipate was what came next. On August 20th, 2025, she posted that she had received confirmed calls from police officers and paramedics present the day her father died, telling her she needed to review the body camera footage from that morning and obtain the 911 tapes because those materials contained information that could change the version of events that had been presented to the public. She said those same people kept contacting her, risking their careers because they felt they had no other choice. The body camera and 911 recordings, she said, were sealed and unavailable under the Freedom of Information Act. The material remained locked. The people who spoke with her remained anonymous, and the question of what those first responders witnessed that was important enough to secretly contact an estranged and grieving daughter has never been publicly answered. Brooke also questioned the leukemia listed on the death certificate, saying she saw his blood work and wondered why that diagnosis was being cited now, in a death certified without an autopsy, for a body already cremated before any doubts could be cleared up. The physical evidence was gone, but the house was still there. The room was still there. And what was inside was exactly what those who made that late-night call 3 days before his death hoped would never be found. What he was building before they found him. By the second forensic analysis, the FBI had already determined that Hogan had undergone major spinal surgery in May, and according to the assessment of medical specialists who reviewed his case after his death, suffered phrenic nerve damage that his surgical team either overlooked or failed to disclose. He had begun making multiple calls to law firms in Washington and New York in the months leading up to his death. Firms that don't specialize in entertainment law or personal injury, but rather in federal criminal defense, the kind of legal structure you build when you believe you're up against parties with the resources to quietly make a problem disappear. He had received an untraceable call 3 nights before his death that left him visibly terrified for the first time in his wife's memory, and his security system had been disabled before anyone could call for help. A man who believes his health is declining naturally doesn't call federal criminal defense attorneys in the final weeks of his life. But according to sources covering the investigation, that's exactly what Hogan did, and the calls weren't exploratory. These were the actions of someone who believed something specific had been done to him. who understood that those responsible had resources he didn't, and who was running out of time to build something that could outlive him. He places the evidence where no one can take it away, ensures it's clearly organized so someone after him can follow it, and on the last day of his life, he returns to it once more because the opportunity is dwindling and he's not willing to let it close just yet. That was the room. And what the investigators found when they opened that folder dated the day before his death confirmed every suspicion they'd had since the moment they entered that eerily sterile gym and found the security cameras already turned off. It was never meant to be found. When the FBI finally opened Hulk Hogan's hidden room, what was inside was never meant to be found. The room reportedly contained a private medical file Hogan had been compiling since shortly after his May surgery. Pre-operative images, post-operative scans, and correspondence with specialists he had consulted independently outside the care of the team that performed the procedure. Notes documenting what sources describe as his growing belief that something had gone wrong on that operating table, specifically that his phrenic nerve had been compromised, and that the team responsible either failed to detect it in time or chose not to disclose it. Communications with contacts whose names don't appear anywhere in his public life, people with whom he had reportedly been discussing his options, what could be proven, and what happens to those who try to prove something against parties powerful enough to make it difficult. The folder dated the day before his death contained what investigators believe to be the most recently added material, organized with the kind of determination that suggests someone who knew exactly what he was doing and why. According to what it allegedly contained, Hogan spent part of his last day consolidating the most critical documents, ensuring the case he had been building was complete enough to outlive him if he ran out of time to finish it himself. The calls to federal criminal lawyers were apparently part of the same effort. The untraceable call 3 nights earlier, sources suggest, came from parties who allegedly had motives to know what he was building and motives to want to stop him before he could reach someone in a position to act on it. Sky Daily's medical malpractice lawsuit, if it goes to trial, will require the exact category of documents Hogan spent his final months assembling in a room no one was supposed to find to be put into the public record. That process is still underway. The body camera footage from that morning remains sealed. The 911 tapes remain locked away. The professionals who were present that day and who have contacted Brooke remain anonymous, and the FBI has only confirmed that the investigation remains open and that no final conclusion has been reached regarding whether foul play occurred. Not ruled out, not proven, but open. And the Sky case is not the only ongoing legal battle. Nick Hogan, acting as the representative of his father's estate, has filed a federal lawsuit in Florida against radio host Todd Clem, better known as Bubba from Love Sponge, to block the release of an unauthorized documentary about his father that Clem had secretly planned, and decided to release the moment Hogan died and could no longer stop it himself. Clem was one of Hogan's closest friends for decades. He is the same person who publicly claimed that Hogan was in a coma weeks before his death, and now he is the same person whose plans to profit from Hogan's most private material were set in motion the moment he passed away. What did Clem know? When did he know it? And why was he already prepared to act so quickly? It's a question the lawsuit has yet to answer. Hulk Hogan spent 40 years playing the role of an invincible man, and in the final months of his life, in a room in his own basement that no one was meant to know existed, he continued to fight, not for a crowd or a title, but for the truth about what had been done to him, and for the possibility of surviving his death. Whether he will is the big question. The federal investigation is still open. The footage remains sealed. The files are still being reviewed, and the people who know what those body cameras captured are still out there. Leave your theories in the comments because this story isn't over, and when the next piece emerges, you'll wish you'd been here from the beginning. When Hulk Hogan was found dead on July 24, 2025, federal agents arrived at his Clearwater mansion with cybercrime specialists and computer forensics units. They found a room behind a wall that wasn't listed in any architectural records, and those who were present when he died have contacted his daughter privately, telling her that the story presented to the public isn't complete. What was inside that room should never have been found. Do you think what's on those sealed tapes changes everything?